Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your daily deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Chris, and joining me as always is Laura.
Thank you, Chris. And I have to say, I have been waiting all weekend to talk about this one because it is the rare story where the org chart is the news, and the org chart actually matters enormously.
So set the table for people who saw a headline, scroll past, and assumed it was just another executive shuffle at a very large technology company, because I do not think that is what this is.
On August 5th, 2026, Google and Alphabet chief executive Sundar Pichai published a message to the Google DeepMind teams, and Google put that message on its own blog, which is where I read it rather than reading somebody's summary of it.
I want to underline that because we have been burned before by stories where 12 outlets reprint one press release and it starts to feel like 12 independent confirmations when it is really just one document.
Exactly right. And in this case, the document is unusually rich because it is actually two memos published together, one from Pichai and one from Demis Hassabis, each writing in his own voice to the teams he leads.
Okay, so what is the headline change? State it as plainly as you can state it before we get into what any of it means for the broader ecosystem.
Demis Hassabis is handing over his day-to-day operational responsibilities at Google DeepMind, and he is becoming chair of Google DeepMind and chief scientist of Alphabet, while continuing to lead the drug discovery company Isomorphic Labs.
So he is not leaving, which is the thing I want to be careful about, because a lot of the chatter I saw over the weekend treated this as a departure, and it very clearly is not one.
It is not a departure, and Hassabis says so in his own words in that memo, writing that he has been working towards AGI his whole life, and now, like many of you, he feels it is close at hand.
That is a remarkable sentence to put in an internal memo, and I want to sit with it for a second, because executives do not usually write things like that unless they mean them or unless they want them quoted.
Both can be true at once, and I think that is the honest reading. He also frames the move as wanting the time and space to focus on the big picture and help influence what is to come.
So who actually runs the lab now, day to day, when the models ship late and somebody has to decide what gets cut and what slips?
Koray Kavukcuoglu, who is already the chief technology officer of Google DeepMind and Google's chief AI architect, steps up as senior vice president of Google DeepMind, and he reports directly to Pichai.
Tell me about him, because I think most listeners outside the research community genuinely do not know that name, even though they have almost certainly used something he helped build.
Pichai wrote that Koray has been at DeepMind since its early days, and over his 13 years there, he started their deep learning team and led the way on breakthroughs like WaveNet and DQN.
Those are not small credits to have on your record, and the scope he inherits now is enormous. So tell me exactly what lands on his desk in this new role.
He now oversees Gemini model development, frontier AI research, and the Gemini app and developer teams, which is essentially the entire engine room of Google's artificial intelligence effort, reporting through one person.
And for scale, in that same memo, Pichai wrote that the Gemini app reached more than 950 million monthly users, which is a genuinely staggering number of people touching one product.
It is, and Hassabis repeats that figure in his own note, describing the Gemini app as rocketing to over 950 million monthly users, which tells you the number is the point they both wanted landed.
All right, but none of that is the part that made my inbox light up on Wednesday. So let us get to the part that actually surprised people who follow this closely.
The part that surprised everybody is buried near the end of Pichai's memo, where he writes that after an incredible 27-year run, Jeff Dean is at a moment where he wants to try something new.
Jeff Dean is leaving Google. I want to say that slowly, because for a certain generation of engineers, that sentence lands about the way it would land if somebody told you gravity was being reassigned.
TechCrunch reported that Dean has worked at Google since 1999 and was the company's 30th employee, so he has been there essentially since there was a there to be at.
And he is not going alone, which is the detail that turns this from a retirement story into something a lot more consequential for the rest of the industry.
He is not. Pichai announced that Dean and Google's senior fellow Sanjay Ghemawat are launching an independent public benefit corporation to accelerate discoveries in machine learning, science, and engineering, and that company is called Discovery Loop.
Walk me through the founding team, because when I looked at the roster on the company's own site, I actually laughed out loud at how absurd it is on paper.
The founding team per Discovery Loop's own website is Jeff Dean, Sanjay Ghemawat, Quoc Le, and Oriol Vinyals, and the company claims it collectively represents 3 of the most cited researchers in artificial intelligence.
And 2 of the most cited researchers in distributed systems. which is the part people underrate, because the distributed systems work is the reason any of the AI work was ever physically possible at scale.
That is exactly the right instinct. Sanjay Ghemawat is a Google Senior Fellow and a co-creator of the Google File System, Bigtable, and Spanner, which is to say a very large portion of how the modern internet stores things.
Quoc Le is the other name I want to flag, because his contribution is one of those things that quietly sits underneath every chatbot anyone has ever used without most people knowing it.
Quoc Le co-invented sequence-to-sequence learning along with Ilya Sutskever and Oriol Vinyals, and that is the breakthrough that opened the road to neural machine translation and then to the large language models we all argue about now.
And Vinyals himself is not a minor figure either, given what he was doing right up until the day this was announced, which I think is the most telling detail in the whole story.
Oriol Vinyals co-led the Gemini program with Jeff Dean, and he also did the pioneering work on AlphaStar. So the person co-leading Google's flagship model franchise is walking out the door with the chief scientist.
Okay. So the obvious question, and the one I would want answered if I owned this stock, is what could possibly be interesting enough to pull those 4 specific people out of that specific building?
Their answer is that they want to automate the scientific method itself. And I mean that literally rather than as marketing language, because their own site describes the bottleneck in very concrete operational terms.
Give me the concrete version, because every AI company in the world says it wants to accelerate science, and almost none of them say anything falsifiable about how.
The framing on their site is that scientific progress has relied on slow, sequential human iterations, where you propose an experiment, implement it, run it, examine the results, then iterate, and that loop is the thing they intend to automate end to end.
And the claim about throughput is where it gets interesting, because that is the part that either works or very obviously does not, which I appreciate about it.
Discovery Loop says its approach allows for the parallel execution of thousands of experiments, which compresses iteration time and, in their words, drives up both the quantity and the quality of scientific and engineering output.
Here's where I want to push back a little, because thousands of experiments in parallel is easy to say, and the physical world does not generally cooperate with that kind of language.
You are right to push, and I think they know it, which is why the first target is not the physical world at all. They say they will initially focus on automating machine learning research and engineering.
Acting as their own first customer, which is genuinely the smartest possible sequencing. And also the part that should make people sit up, because that is a recursive loop by design.
It is explicitly recursive. They use the automated machine learning capability to optimize their own technology stack, and only then do they point the same machinery outward at problems in the physical world.
And what are those outward problems once the loop is supposedly working? Because that is where the ambition either becomes credible or becomes a pitch deck.
They name National Academy of Engineering grand challenges directly, including engineering better medicines, making solar energy economical, and providing access to clean water, which is about as unhedged a statement of ambition as you will find.
In their joint statement, the founding team said, "The next great frontier for AI is to go beyond answering questions and to begin making discoveries," which is a clean articulation of the whole thesis.
And Dean told the New York Times something more measured that I actually found more persuasive, saying there is opportunity for AI to more fully automate what has traditionally been a very human-intensive experimental loop.
That is a much more careful sentence than the marketing version, and I trust it more precisely because it is careful. Now let us follow the money, because the money here is genuinely strange.
It is strange. Pichai wrote that Google will continue to work with them as a founding investor and cloud partner, and will collaborate on a research framework for machine learning systems and related infrastructure advances.
So Google is funding the company that its own chief scientist and its own Gemini co-lead left to start, and is also selling them the compute they will run it on.
That is the shape of it. TechCrunch reported the initial funding round is co-led by Radical Ventures and Quoc Le Ventures, with Kleiner Perkins, Lightspeed, and Door Capital also participating, and Radical confirmed its co-lead role on its own blog.
Radical also noted that Discovery Loop is building an in-person team in Palo Alto, and Jeff Dean is the chief executive, which are small details that tell you this is a real operating company and not a research affiliation.
Right, and I want to be fair to Google here because there is a genuinely reasonable reading in which this is a good outcome for them rather than a loss they are spinning.
Make that case, because I think our listeners deserve the strongest version of it before we start being clever about what it might really mean.
The strongest version is that senior researchers were going to leave regardless, and Google converted a departure into an investment, a cloud contract, and a research collaboration, which is strictly better than watching them join a rival.
And Hassabis makes the confidence case explicitly, writing that Google is the only company that has the full stack and is world-class at every layer from infrastructure to cloud to frontier models to AI-first applications.
He also says he is excited about the progress on new models, including Gemini 4, and that he will keep advising the leads from their new London platform 37 offices, so he is not exactly riding into the sunset.
Now give me the uncomfortable reading, because I would rather we say it out loud than pretend a pair of upbeat internal memos is the only evidence anybody should be weighing here.
The uncomfortable reading is available inside the memo itself, because the same document that celebrates momentum also announces that the chief scientist and a co-lead of Gemini are both walking out at the same time.
And the uncomfortable structural question is whether a company can lose its chief scientist and a co-lead of its flagship model program in a single announcement and have that be neutral.
I think the honest answer is that we will not know for a year, and anyone telling you confidently today is selling something. What I will say is that institutional knowledge of that depth does not transfer through documentation.
There's also a philosophical thread here that I keep coming back to, which is what it says about where these people think the frontier actually is right now.
That is the part I find most revealing. 4 people who could work on any problem in technology looked at the landscape and concluded the interesting bottleneck is not the model, it is the rate of experimentation around the model.
Which is a bet that we are no longer limited by ideas or by talent, but by how fast the loop between hypothesis and result can be turned. And that is a very specific claim about this moment.
And it is a testable one, which I keep saying because it matters. If they automate machine learning research and their own stack visibly improves faster than everyone else's, that is evidence you can actually see from outside.
Meanwhile, Hassabis is pointing his own attention somewhere quite different. And I do not think that is a coincidence given what he has already proven he can do in that direction.
He wrote that he has always believed the #1 application of AI should be to improve human health, and he is leaning further into isomorphic labs to push on exactly that.
Which is not an idle claim from him specifically, given that he and his co-lead John Jumper won a Nobel Prize in 2024 for the AlphaFold work predicting the 3-dimensional structures of proteins.
So you have one of the field's most decorated scientists moving toward disease, and 4 of its most decorated engineers moving toward the machinery of discovery itself, announced on the very same day by the same company.
When you frame it that way, it stops looking like an org chart and starts looking like a statement about what the next phase of this industry is supposed to be about.
That is my read too, and I would add one caution. Every one of these ambitions is currently a sentence on a website, and sentences on websites have a historically poor track record against laboratory reality.
So what specifically should people watch over the next few quarters to know whether any of this is working, rather than just reading more coverage of the coverage?
Watch whether Discovery Loop publishes anything about its own stack improving. Watch whether Google's model release cadence changes under Kavukcuoglu, and watch whether any of those grand challenges gets a concrete milestone attached to it.
And I would add, watch whether other labs start losing their infrastructure people rather than their model people, because that would tell you this thesis is spreading beyond 4 unusually famous engineers.
That is a sharp addition, and it is the kind of signal that shows up in hiring pages long before it shows up in a press release, which is where I will be looking.
That is a genuinely fitting place to leave it, and I suspect we will be revisiting this one many times before the year's out. That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.